Poison Control Center. How can I help you?
Experts on standby every second of every day. What do poison control experts hear on the other end of the phone? Get their best advice for keeping your kids safe. Good morning. I'm Alexis Del Cid in for Jessica Lovell. Welcome to the Morning Medical Update. Accidental child poisoning deaths are going up in the U.S. We're talking about cleaning products, medication, even batteries. The Consumer Product Safety Commission found in 2021, 59 children under the age of 5 died from unintentional poisonings. That's a 37% increase from the year before. But before we dive into that, we want to do some morning rounds. And we want to talk about the higher temperatures, which can be very dangerous. This week, a toddler in Lenexa, Kansas was hospitalized in critical condition after being left in a hot car. Police say it appears it was an accident. We want to bring in Dr. Sean Sood, who joins us more. Dr. Sood is a pediatric critical care physician at the health system. Good morning, doctor.
Hi, Alexis. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for being here. We want to talk to you about these hot temperatures. Our temperatures have been in the mid to upper 90s. The feels like temperature is over 100. It doesn't even need to be that hot, though, outside for a car to turn into an oven, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This topic often gets covered during the summertime, and rightfully so, but temperatures can be 60 or 70 degrees outside, and a child still can suffer from a heat stroke if they're left inside a car. In fact, if it's 75 degrees outside, it only takes 25 minutes for a car temperature to get to 100 degrees. And so cars definitely have a predisposition to retain heat.
So how does heat affect a child's body differently than it would affect you or me or any adult?
Yeah, absolutely. Children are definitely different than adults. They regulate temperature very differently. And so the rate of rise of a child's body temperature is 5 times faster than an adult. And so a child overheats 3 to 5 times faster than an adult does. And what that means is if a child's internal temperature is 104 degrees Fahrenheit, their organs start getting angry and not functioning as they properly and normally do. And at 107 degrees at that internal temperature, organ death starts to occur.
We do stories on this. This happens every summer, parents leaving their child or their baby in a hot car, and all the time they say they never thought they would do this. There are parents watching who say that could never be me. But then it happens. So we do have, and you have some great information to share on how everyone can avoid doing something like this.
Yeah, it's really sad. Every year we see 1 or 2 cases where a well-meaning parent accidentally leaves their child in the back seat of their car. 90% of heat strokes and heat stroke deaths that occur in this type of situation occur in children under 3 years of age. And if you think about why that is, children 3 and under are usually in a rear-facing car seat. Sometimes that child goes to sleep or takes a nap, and a parent or caregiver forgets that they're in the back seat. And so a great tip that I tell parents is put something essential in the back seat and make it a routine. Even if your child is in the car or not, make it a habit to go to the back seat, get your employee badge, get your wallet, get your purse, get your phone. So every time after you leave the car, it forces you to go to the back seat and get something essential, and also to see if your child is there or not.
Boy, the purse or the employee badge is a great idea. Want to move on from hot cars for a minute and talk about just how hot it is outside. Is there ever a temperature when it's just best to keep kids inside?
Yeah, good luck, especially in the summertime, to keep a kid indoors when you have the nice sun outside and the opportunity to go out swimming. It's really tough just to keep a kid indoors during the summertime. But one point of advice I'd give is we have seen a case where a toddler is inside, and just keep your car locked even if you're indoors. We've seen a case where a toddler got into the garage, got into the car, and couldn't get outside of the car. And so it's hard to keep your kids indoors in the summertime, but car safety, car seat safety, and just protection and vigilance for your children are always really important.
I remember covering or anchoring the news once, and a story came out about some kids who got accidentally locked in a trunk of a car outside in the summertime. It was a horrible story. That's such good information. Dr. Sood, thank you.
Thank you.
Today we're talking with two experts at the Kansas Poison Control Center. Joining us now, we have Dr. Elizabeth Silver. They are here at the University of Kansas Health System, and Dr. Stephen Thornton, the medical director of poison control, as well as emergency medicine physician. And Dr. Silver is a pharmacist, and she is the managing director of the Kansas Poison Control Center. You both have very good and long credentials. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy days to join us. Before we begin, though, we do want to share with our viewers a very important hotline. It's the Poison Control Hotline. Everybody watching, we encourage you to write this number down. If you are in Kansas, put this on your refrigerator, tape it to your drawer, save it to your phone. Here's the number: 1-800-222-1222. We're going to leave that number up on your screen for a little bit. If you ever need to use that hotline, the last thing you want is to try to spend time Googling the number or asking Siri to find it for you. So save that number where you can see it. Dr. Silver, if someone calls that number, they're talking to a member of your team.
Correct.
So we want to ask you, what are some of the most common calls that you get?
Well, we get a lot of calls about children. So kids under the age of 6 get into a lot of things. So a lot of medications, that is by far the most common type of call we get, is any type of medication, prescription, over the counter, kids getting into it. But then a lot of household products. This can be cleaning products, this can be things like lotion, shampoo, deodorant. So things that we just keep around the home that are kind of everywhere around us, those are definitely the most common calls that we get.
Dr. Silver, do you get more calls in the summer because more kids are home and the parents are working?
I'd say it's pretty even. It really just depends on the season and the types of calls. So we might see more calls about insect repellents and bug sprays and sunscreen in the summer, pesticides, for example, as opposed to maybe in the winter we might see more calls on carbon monoxide poisoning.
Interesting. Okay, and you provided some valuable information we want to share with our viewers right now. Last year, the Kansas Poison Control Center handled almost 18,000 calls. That's around 2 calls every hour. Over the past year, Kansas Poison Control treated more than 2,000 children from poisonings from common household products. The most frequent age group, children 5 and under. So how do these poisonings happen most commonly, and how can we prevent them?
So this is the age for kids where they are learning about the world and exploring it, especially after they're 18 months with their hands. That hand-to-mouth coordination really starts to increase. They may not have, a high reading level, so they can't tell the difference between Pine Sol versus apple juice, or Dulcolax stool softener and a chocolate bar, for example, candy versus medication. So they are just exploring the world. Things are around them, getting into them, and they may not know that it's not safe.
And in an effort to make things easier, like pods for detergent, it's also more dangerous because things look like candy. I want to bring in Dr. Thornton. Do you have anything in terms of prevention that you'd like to add when it comes to younger children?
So I think it's important for the audience to know that the general rule is kids will get into anything and everything. If it's in the house, just figure that the child's going to find a way to get into it. And you want to put as many barriers as you can to prevent that. I think what I try to tell people is treat everything like a medication. I think most folks are pretty good about locking up their medications, keeping those away from children. But I would treat every chemical, every household product like a medication, particularly with the younger kids, as Dr. Silver said, because what to you is obviously something you would never never drink.
Right.
A 2-year-old, 3-year-old, that may be something they unfortunately try.
Sure, they'd want to try everything. They put the weirdest things in their mouths off the floor often, and it's not poison, it's just gross. But it's really scary when it's something that could really hurt them, which is something like a dish detergent pod. So Dr. Thornton, I want to continue this conversation with you. When that happens, what's the first step? You know your child has just swallowed a pod or bit into it and popped it in their mouth.
Well, obviously you want to take it away, make sure there's no further exposure, and then you want to give us a call. Give the Poison Control Center a call, and we will basically, our specialists are all highly trained. They've been doing this for a long time. We want to basically keep everything calm and give you the correct information. Many times, these exposures are something that we've heard many, many times, and we can tell you this is what's going to happen. It's going to be okay. We can reassure. Sometimes the exposures cause more problems than you might think, and so you want to get us involved as soon as possible so that we can make the biggest impact on your child's health.
We shared the poison control number, but I also want to follow up. Should you call 911 first or poison control?
I would recommend calling the Poison Control Center because you don't
Okay.
always have to call 911. We can help you figure that out. For instance, ingesting toothpaste, not something that you need to call 911 about, but ingesting some of these denture creams, other products, something that might end up putting a child in the emergency department. So we can kind of help figure that out for you, and we can, triage is a term we use to kind of figure out, do you need an ambulance or do you not?
Okay. And then at what point should we try to make the child vomit? Or should we?
That is not something we recommend.
Okay.
That was something that was done for a long time. People may remember the syrup of Ipecac.
Right.
That was in every home.
Yeah.
That fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, has been proven to not be effective, to potentially cause more harm. So we do not recommend that. We don't even recommend inducing vomiting when they get to the hospital, the emergency department. So that's really more kind of now like an urban legend / myth.
Okay, something that our grandmas and moms might have thought was
I think
what we needed to do, but that's changed.
Yeah, I think it comes to the point where folks think that they want to do something, and we understand that, but sometimes doing nothing is better than doing something that might cause
And
further
then
harm.
after this, do they always need to be evaluated by a doctor for follow-up care, or can this be handled the day of in the hospital or with poison control?
Oh, I would say a majority of the cases we're able to handle at home with our experience, our specialists. So that's why that's important. That, my gosh, if every time a child got into something at home, they had to go to the emergency department, we'd have to build like 100 more emergency departments. I mean, we would really overwhelm us. So we can help keep the child away unnecessarily trips to the hospital emergency department.
And then when it comes to medications, Dr. Silver, we were talking about how important it is, and Dr. Thornton, to keep medications away. Those childproof caps aren't always childproof. Kids can find a way to get in, or even a parent might open one medication next to their medication and give their child the wrong medication. So what do you tell parents about that?
So one, we call it child resistant because it's even young kids, you give the bottle to them, or if they get into it, they're going to find a way. With enough time, they will open that bottle. So keeping them stored in a place where the children don't have access to them, where they can't reach them. Another thing that we recommend is to not take your medications while your child is watching. Children do like to imitate adult behavior. We don't want them to confuse it for something like candy or something that, oh, I should take this every morning like my mom or my dad does. So we recommend store them up and away, out of sight. Keep them in the original child-proof, child-resistant containers, and try to just keep that away from, like, if you're eating or if you're taking them around your kids, so they may not want to take it with you.
When people go on vacation, oftentimes they pack things in their little pill boxes.
Yes.
That must pose a different kind of risk.
It does. Anytime you're really breaking your routine, especially with medications, there's a risk that something is going to go awry, right? So that you might put it in a different container that isn't child resistant, which makes it easier for the kid to get in. Even the medication boxes with like the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, that's really good for helping patients remind them when to take the medication, but that's not child resistant. So if there are going to be kids around, if you're going to your grandparents' house, for example, or another family member's, they might have medication there. They may not have children there normally. So that's a good reminder for them to store their medications away, because they may not have to worry about that on a routine basis.
Dr. Thornton, I want to ask you about supplements. Everybody, well, I shouldn't say everybody, many people take a number of supplements. There's melatonin, all sorts of different vitamins. Do these same rules apply to supplements, and how often are you seeing children who've had accidental poisonings from a supplement?
Well, absolutely. The over-the-counter or the non-prescription medications, the herbal products, the supplements, those are all things that can potentially cause problems. Some of them are very benign, but some of them can cause significant illness, particularly if children take a lot of anything. You wouldn't believe it, but even something as simple as table salt. If a child eats not actually that much table salt, they can get quite ill. So there are some threats that are there in plain sight, and people just kind of take it for granted that nobody would ever do that. But children, they're in their own world. They as we've already said, they will get into anything. They will find anything you drop on the floor, anything that's left out. I really support what Dr. Silver said. I would also recommend that the part about the keeping stuff in its original packaging, not just for medications, but for any kind of products. Because we get calls all the time where somebody put antifreeze into a Coca-Cola can, and the child drinks the Coca-Cola can because it's Coca-Cola, and it turns out they could drink antifreeze. So you want to, again, you're already behind the 8 ball because kids are the greatest at getting into stuff. So you want to make it as hard as you can for them. And so, like I said, keep stuff locked up, treat everything like a medication, and remember to call the Poison Control Center.
Kids are like mini Houdinis. If it's there, they'll figure out a way to get to it.
I tell a patient all the time, if you drop a pill and you can't find it, I guarantee you the 2-year-old will. Exactly.
Or your dog.
Yep.
Hopefully neither, but the child knows. It's like they're finding little treasures around the house.
It's remarkable.
In addition to the hotline, the Kansas Poison Control website has some fantastic information, so we'd love to direct you to kansashealthsystem.com/poison, and you can learn a ton of more information there. And Dr. Silver, there are also not so obvious household products that can be poisonous. I mean, Dr. Thornton, I never in a million years did I think of hiding salt when my son was a toddler. Most people know cleaning liquids and prescription drugs must be kept away from children. What else have you seen, Dr. Silver?
So something that is kind of unique that people may not think about is button batteries. I know that there's definitely been in the news prior. Button batteries are not just a choking hazard like pennies or other foreign objects that a kid might put into their mouth, but they pose a special risk because it actually is a battery, and so that can cause a lot of damage and tissue damage if it gets stuck in the child's throat. What's
scariest about button batteries, I think, is that your child could swallow one, or your toddler, and you wouldn't know it until some bad things start happening. They might just swallow it and you don't notice it missing. They pull it out of a toy or something. So are there any signs that we can look for? Any immediate signs? So immediate signs would still be choking hazard risk. So depending on the size of the button battery, obviously if your child is showing signs of choking or that something is lodged in their throat, they're not able to talk correctly or breathe correctly, that's going to be an immediate sign. But other things we start to look at, if they can't tolerate food, if they're drooling a lot, if they are having problems breathing, or if they're just not responding normally. It really depends on the age of the child based on if they can verbalize if something is wrong with them or if they can't verbalize if something is wrong with them. So if your child is not acting normally, and as a parent you know your child best for how they are behaving and how they respond, that is something to look for and when to seek medical attention if you think there's something wrong. There's another element to this that we want to address, which is parents and caregivers feel so ashamed when this happens, and there's a reason why we don't have a parent out here sharing their personal story, or a grandma or an aunt or an uncle. There are plenty of them that could share stories, but none of them feel comfortable talking about their worst moment to the public. What would you tell a parent who's feeling ashamed, Dr. Thornton?
That you're part of an incredibly large club, that a lot of people have been there, that it does not make you a bad parent. I have to admit, my child has gotten into medications that we put in a plastic baggie and when we were on the road, kind of a thing. So we all make mistakes, and it's just part of life. And don't think that you're the only one like this never happened, because believe we've probably heard everything at least once. And we don't judge. We're just here to help. And what you want to do is obviously, whatever's happened, that's happened. Let's make sure nothing bad comes from it.
Thank you so much for sharing that it happened to you. That's going to help so many people watching who feel like they're a horrible person because it happened to them, and they're not. If it can happen to you, it can happen to anyone. Dr. Silver, what about you? What would you have to say to parents or caregivers who are feeling?
I would really just echo what Dr. Thornton said. I mean, we've heard every scenario, every story. I have a lot of colleagues at other poison centers, and so this is something that you see not just here, Kansas Poison Center, this is across the country. Dr. Thornton mentioned kids are little Houdinis, and they are always going to be kind of one step ahead of us, so it's what we can do to try to just prevent those from happening, and know that if it happens, hopefully not when, but if it happens, there is a resource there that is free that will be able to give you the information. that you
So
need.
great, and just keep that number. Keep that number somewhere near your phone or in multiple places around your house. Another thing that's so interesting is it's not just the general public who calls poison control. You get calls from doctors, from nurses, from other providers working in hospitals and clinics. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so we have, even though children make up a large majority of the calls that are unintentional and accidental, we do get a variety of calls from adults that get into things. We have, double doses, medication errors, but then we do have a large chunk of exposures that are intentional ingestions from self-harm attempts. And a lot of those calls do end up going to the hospital. Doctors and nurses and other team members that are calling often already have patients that are symptomatic. So whether it was intentional or not, we're not only dealing with, is it safe to stay home, but what do we need to do to help treat this? What labs do we need? Do we need types of imaging and EKG? How long do we watch the patient for? And how long is this medication going to have clinical effects? So we deal with the treatment side as well.
Your expertise, they're calling you.
Yeah, so what I like to tell people is you get good at what you do all the time.
Right.
And this is what we do all the time. And most doctors don't take care of overdoses every day, all the time. That's what we do. We take care of poisoning, bites, whatever you want to call them. And so you have the experts phone call away. Just give us a call. We're happy to help.
Also want to give a shout out to some interesting colleagues you have in the Poison Control Center with you. You have a dog and a cat named Hunter and Scout. Let's take a look at Hunter and Scout.
It's always important to ask first, especially when it comes to lookalikes.
What's a lookalike?
A lookalike is a poison that looks just like something safe. Let's see if you and you can tell them apart. It's time for... Which one is poison?
We love Hunter and Scout. They are the poison control puppets. And of course, we also love the award-winning puppeteer Mike Horner. They go on patrol to local schools to teach poison safety. That is such a smart way, Dr. Silver, to get kids' attention.
Yeah,
And such a great learning tool.
Yeah, we have really good reception. We have a lot of educational materials. Our educator, Stephanie Baines, works very hard on this. So we have a lot of materials that schools request, nurses, parents, all for children to learn about poisoning prevention and safety while they're at that young age.
Such a smart learning tool. We're getting some great questions and comments from our audience. Be sure to bring your questions and comments to poison control experts as well right here on the set with me. They will answer you directly. You can send it to us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, or the KU Hospital hotline, the KU Hospital YouTube hotline, and you can also email us at medicalnewsnetwork@kumc.edu. We're everywhere, basically, so you can reach us. We also want to give you your COVID count today. Dr. Dana Hawkinson has the day off. I mean, we got to give the guy some rest at some point.
I know.
He is our superhero, but he needs his rest. So we're going to read him to you. Right now, we have 12 total inpatients, 6 active cases, 1 in the ICU, and 0 on the ventilator. And now we want to ask if we have any reporters on the line who have questions for us today. All right, so we are going to get to your questions. And actually, we have a great tip. This one comes from Georgianne Grunthaler. She writes this. I think you'll love this. She writes, I sit on the floor and see the view from a toddler's perspective anytime before a young child comes over. So she sits and she looks at eye level, especially looking for possible drop medication or any small object on the floor. I pad sharp corners. I do a full sweep and clean. Peace of mind. Can't do enough prep, especially if you don't have young children. Georgianne, I would feel so safe when I was a new mom with my child with you. That's great advice.
Yes.
That is, yes.
Okay, Ruth Ellen has a question. Ruth Ellen wants to know, with the pandemic, we've had hand sanitizer around our homes, schools, businesses, in bulk, it's everywhere. Have there been some concerns with hand sanitizer?
Absolutely.
Yes, yeah. So hand sanitizer is really a lot of alcohol, and we've had cases where children have drank and become intoxicated from the amount of alcohol that's in hand sanitizers.
Jeez.
Fortunately, it's usually not much more toxic than that, but it's still, you don't want a 2-year-old getting into alcohol. So yes, it goes back to my general rule. If it's in the home, whether it's hand sanitizers, Tide Pods, whatever it may be, kids are going to kids are going to get into it.
It's tricky too because they started making hand sanitizer smell better. And my husband has one in our car and it smells like Fruit Loops, which if we had a toddler and this was in the house, that would be a real warning.
In general, when these sort of modifications to products are made, it seems like the kids are the last thing that the companies kind of think about. For instance, the Tide Pods being made all bright colored and looking like candy. I guess nobody sat at a table and said, hey, you know what, this looks like candy, maybe kids are going to eat it.
Maybe we shouldn't do that.
Until they did. So.
Okay, so I have a comment from Joellen who's piggybacking on what Georgianne wrote about sitting on the floor to see the view from a child's perspective. And Joellen writes, double doses, yes. I once did this and realized it immediately, called my pharmacist right away. She's actually saying double doses yes to you, Dr. Thornton.
Wow.
Don't feel shame. She called the pharmacist right away and they were able to reassure her that she was going to be okay, or her loved one, little one, was going to be okay. Okay, I have got some questions that came in on our email. Lynn has a great one. She wants to know, is poison control free?
Yes, poison control is completely free. That 1-800 number, give it a call. We will not ask you for credit card information. If you do get someone asking for credit card information or Social Security, that is not us. So it is completely free.
No, we'll never ask for any of that type. It is free nationwide. It is. It is really a remarkable service. It's the only really free service you can get where you can get a medical specialist. So,
Reese wants to know, because we gave that number at the top of our program of poison control, do you have to be in Kansas to utilize the Kansas poison control number?
So that 1-800 number is the nationwide poison help number.
Okay.
And if you're in Kansas, especially with a Kansas area code, it does a lot better with that. But ideally, if you're in Kansas, it should route you to the Kansas Poison Center. Now, if you have a Kansas area code and you travel, you still might get us. But if you're in other parts of the country, you should be routed to the closest regional poison center.
Okay, that's good to know with vacations
Yes.
and such. Tim wants to know what happens if a poison control nurse tells the caller to go to an ER, but the caller refuses. Will the nurse send an ambulance?
No.
Who wants to tackle that one?
Most of the time, no. I would say there's rare circumstances where welfare checks are considered if it's a really high-risk scenario, or the caller has symptoms when they call and then we lose the call. I can count on like one hand how many times. But most of the time, if the caller doesn't want to go in, we will just try to reassure them and ask, can we still call you back? Can we still at least have us check on you and just make sure that you're doing okay?
And I would say in a lot of those cases, our specialists are very good at convincing people that this is what needs to be done. They work with them, they tell them, they have the experience. So, everybody just wants the best for the child in those situations.
Nancy wants to know if there's a time of day when the poison control hotline is the busiest.
I would say leading into the evening with our hospital calls, we tend to see, and people getting out of work, people picking up children from home. After about 3 p.m. is where we see probably the biggest peak of our calls into about 9-10 p.m. We definitely get calls all throughout the day. People still take medications all day, multiple times a day. But, when kids are getting out of school, when parents are getting off work, they're picking their children up from daycare, that's when we start to see probably the highest peak of our calls during the day.
Pauline has a great question. She'd like to know if the doctors would comment on gummies, marijuana gummies, gummy supplements. She continues, they seem dangerous.
Well, that goes back to if it's in the home, the child will get into it, and
those do look like candy.
Yes, and these are in a lot of homes now, and sometimes people don't necessarily treat them like the medications that they are, the potent medications. So yes, we've every state that is legalized those sees a huge spike in the number of kids who gets into them, and kids that end up in emergency departments and whatnot. So it is a problem.
Leslie has kind of a Dear Abby moment. Leslie says, my parents say they never locked their cabinets when I was young, so they don't need to lock cabinets when I bring over my son, their grandson. How do I change their mind? Boy, that would be frustrating. That'd be really infuriating. Dr. Silver, you want to tackle that? What does she tell her parents?
Well, just because it hasn't happened to you or you didn't do something doesn't mean it can't happen to you in the future or can't happen to your grandchild. I mean, I think we all have a little bit of, oh, it can't happen to me. With a lot of things in life, medications, kids getting into them being one of them. But the safest approach will be to lock those cabinets and just take those precautions so that it doesn't happen to your child or your grandchild.
Emily writes, I've read that you should give your child honey if they swallow a battery before or on your way to get medical care. Does that actually help? Dr. Thornton, is that an old wives' tale?
Actually, there's some recent studies that suggest that does help a bit. However,
Okay.
there's a caveat. We would still recommend calling the Poison Control Center because if you're only 5 or 10 minutes away from a hospital, it's probably not something that needs to be done. We can take care of that at the hospital. However, if it's going to be hours, if you're really far away from a hospital, then yes, we may instruct that because there's actually studies that show that it can help reduce the amount of damage that the batteries can cause.
Oh, so for batteries?
Yes, for batteries.
That would be...
Yes, that's the big thing is batteries. It's actually been shown to help in those cases.
And
again, if you're far away from a hospital, if you can get right to a hospital, we can get some stuff taken care of without doing that.
Oh, we have so many viewers in rural areas. So
Exactly.
that would be
Sometimes it is a
incredibly
challenge.
helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's safe to say always have honey on hand if you have little ones?
And that's another thing to emphasize. The Poison Control Center. We get calls from every county in the state of Kansas, from every hospital. So we're available everywhere, all the time, any place.
One more question just rolled in from Yen Liang. Yen wants to know if you basically, how do you keep children away from cosmetics? Which the follow-up would be, do you get poisonings from cosmetics ever? Like a child eating a lipstick or something like that?
Yeah. We get, people that, when I was just doing my makeup this morning on my counter, I don't really think about it because I don't have a child, but it's within reach if there was a kid in the home to take my mascara or take lipstick or take blush, and that can be potentially irritating to the child if they put it on their skin or they're replicating what their parents are doing. So that's still good to have a section of the home or a section where you keep those medications, keep your cosmetics, keep other household products, even if it's not locked up, but away where they can't reach it, and know to put them back when you're done using them.
And as we begin to wrap up our discussion, I want to make sure we get the biggest takeaways from our doctors. Dr. Silver, what's the most pressing thing you want our viewers to know?
I would put that 1-800 number in your phone, memorize it, 1-800-222-1222, and we are here free 24/7.
Dr. Thornton.
I would say you're not alone, that life happens and kids happen, and when it does, give us a call, we'll help.
That is so helpful and so reassuring for so many people watching. Thank you both. Thank you, doctors, for being here. And thank you to our viewers for joining the discussion today. We hope you have a great holiday weekend. We'll be back here, though, on Monday morning.
Coming up Monday on the Morning Medical Update. Flashes, fizzles, and booms make up the 4th of July, and they make it fun. But fireworks inevitably send people to the hospital. I'm Jessica Lovell on the next Morning Medical Update. Hear what medical experts see year after year, plus what makes the burn unit at the University of Kansas Health System unique in the country. Monday at 8.
Subscribe to our Morning Medical Update and Open Mics with Dr. Stites podcast. Now, everywhere podcasts are available.